The rusty alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., but Derek Baxter was already awake, staring at the ceiling of their cramped Seabrook apartment, calculating. Again. Rent, $850. Groceries, $200 if he stretched every dollar. Mia's school supplies, $40 he didn't have. The math never worked, but somehow it had to. Bookmark. The floorboards creaked under Derek's bare feet as he shuffled to the tiny kitchen, careful not to wake his 8-year-old daughter sleeping in the room next door. The coffee maker, a second-hand find from 3 years ago, gurgled to life, filling the small space with the bitter aroma that would fuel another day of impossible choices. Derek pulled 2 slices of bread from the bag on the counter, automatically checking the expiration date. 2 days passed, but it still smelled fine. He spread peanut butter on one slice, grape jelly on the other, wrapping the sandwich in a paper towel before placing it in Mia's purple lunchbox, alongside a juice box and a small bag of crackers. This routine never changed. Every morning, the same careful portions, the same calculated nutrition, on the smallest possible budget. Derek found comfort in the predictability. It meant they were still surviving, still keeping their heads above water, even if just barely. Bookmark. The bathroom mirror reflected back a face that looked older than 32. Dark circles under his eyes told the story of nights spent working at the depot, followed by early mornings making deliveries across Seabrook. His weathered hands bore the calluses of honest work, but also the constant ache of a man whose body was paying the price for doing whatever it took to provide. By 6:15, Derek was gently shaking Mia's shoulder, watching as her sleepy eyes fluttered open to focus on his face. She smiled that crooked little grin that never failed to make his chest tighten with fierce love and protectiveness. Her mother's smile, though Derek tried not to think about that anymore. Not when there were lunches to pack and bills to pay, and a little girl who needed him to be everything. Morning, sunshine, Derek whispered, brushing a strand of dark hair from Mia's forehead. Time to get ready for school. Mia yawned and sat up, her stuffed elephant falling to the floor with a soft thud. Can we have pancakes today, Daddy? Derek's heart squeezed tight. Pancakes meant maple syrup, and maple syrup meant an extra $5 he wouldn't have until Friday's paycheck cleared. How about tomorrow, kiddo? It's sandwich day today. Bookmark. Gee. The disappointment flickered across her face for just a moment before she nodded, already learning the art of accepting what couldn't be changed. That resilience both amazed and broke Derek's heart. 8 years old, and she was already more mature than some adults he knew, already understanding that tomorrow sometimes meant when we can afford it. 20 minutes later, they were in Derek's beat-up Toyota Corolla. 200,000 miles on the odometer and held together by determination and prayer. The engine coughed to life on the second try, and Derek made a mental note to check the spark plugs when he got to work. If he could afford new ones. The radio crackled with morning traffic reports as they wound through the familiar streets of Seabrook, past coffee shops Derek couldn't afford and boutiques that might as well have been on another planet. The local news anchor's voice filled the car. City officials continue to debate funding for infrastructure repairs, with particular concern about the aging Crescent Bridge, which sees over 15,000 vehicles daily despite engineering reports recommending immediate attention. Bookmark. J78G. Derek turned the volume down as they approached Riverside Elementary. The school sat on a tree-lined street where the houses had fresh paint and the cars in the driveways weren't held together with hope and duct tape. He pulled up to the curb and watched other parents dropping off their children, many dressed in business suits carrying travel mugs that probably cost more than Derek made in a day. Bookmark. He tried not to let the comparison sting, focusing instead on Mia as she gathered her backpack and lunchbox. Have a good day, sweetheart, Derek said, leaning over to kiss her forehead. I'll be here at 3 to pick you up. I love you, Daddy, Mia said, her words spoken with the casual certainty of a child who had never doubted that love would be there waiting for her at the end of each day. Love you too, Mia Bug. Derek watched until she disappeared through the school's front doors, waving at friends whose parents could afford piano lessons and summer camps and all the things that Derek could only dream of providing. He waited until she was safely inside before pulling away from the curb, the familiar weight of inadequacy settling in his chest. The drive to Murphy's delivery service took him across the Crescent Bridge, and as always, Derek found himself holding his breath slightly as the old structure groaned under the weight of morning traffic. The concrete barriers showed decades of wear, with visible cracks running along the guardrails like spiderwebs. 3 years ago, a city inspector had recommended immediate repairs. 3 years later, the bridge still carried thousands of cars daily, while bureaucrats debated budgets and priorities. Derek understood budget debates. Every decision in his life came down to money. Whether Mia could join the school soccer team, whether they could afford the generic cereal, or had to skip breakfast entirely, whether he could fix the Toyota's transmission, or pray it lasted another month. The difference was, when Derek made budget cuts, only his family suffered. When the city made budget cuts, bridges collapsed. Bookmark, Murphy's delivery service occupied a converted warehouse in the industrial district, where the American dream felt more like a distant rumor than an achievable goal. Tom Murphy had owned the business for 20 years, and his weathered hands could organize a delivery route with the same precision other men used to play chess. He'd hired Derek 3 years ago when medical bills from Mia's pneumonia had threatened to drown them in debt. And he'd never once made Derek feel like charity. Bookmark, Gava severed. Morning, Derek, Tom called from behind a stack of packages. Got a full route for you today. Residential deliveries in the Heights, then commercial stops downtown. Should keep you busy until 2:30. Bookmark, JGA. Derek nodded, grateful for the work even as he calculated the hours. Delivery route until 2:30, pick up Mia at 3, dinner and homework until 6, then the night shift at Coastal Depot until midnight. Sleep from 1 a.m. until 5:30, repeat. It wasn't a life, exactly, but it was survival, and survival was enough when you had someone depending on you. The morning passed in a blur of addresses and signatures. Packages delivered to houses Derek would never be able to afford. Conversations with people whose biggest worry was whether their overnight shipping would arrive on time. He found rhythm in the work. The physical satisfaction of completing tasks, the simple interaction with customers who saw him as reliable rather than struggling. During his lunch break, parked outside a convenience store with a peanut butter sandwich that matched his daughter's, Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Mia's teacher. Field trip to the Science Museum next Friday. Permission slip and $15 fee due Monday. Day. $15. Derek stared at the screen, running calculations in his head. He could skip lunch for 3 days, maybe walk to work instead of driving to save gas money. Or he could explain to his 8-year-old daughter why she couldn't go to the museum with her classmates, why $15 might as well be $1,500. Derek closed his eyes and leaned back against the headrest. 3 more hours of deliveries, then Mia's pickup, then 8 hours at the depot, loading trucks, and pretending his back didn't ache from carrying other people's packages all day. Tomorrow he'd find the $15 somehow, because disappointing Mia wasn't an option, even if it meant eating saltine crackers for dinner. Bookmark. The radio was still playing when Derek started the engine for his afternoon deliveries. Traffic reports, weather updates, local news about city council meetings and budget discussions. Normal problems for normal people living normal lives. Derek envied them their normalcy, their ability to worry about traffic jams instead of rent checks, their certainty that tomorrow would bring roughly the same challenges as today. Bookmark. He had no way of knowing that tomorrow would bring something completely different. that in less than 24 hours, 30 seconds of instinctive courage would transform not just his life, but the lives of hundreds of others in ways he couldn't begin to comprehend. Bookmark. For now, there were packages to deliver, a daughter to pick up from school, and another night shift to endure. The quiet heroism of survival, one day at a time. How many of you know that feeling? When you're doing everything right but the math still doesn't add up? Hit that like if you've ever counted coins for groceries. Derek was calculating whether he could afford Mia's school field trip when the sleek black Tesla started spinning out of control ahead of him on Crescent Bridge. Inside that $100,000 car sat a woman whose net worth could buy Derek's entire neighborhood. She had no idea a man who earned less in a year than she spent on coffee was about to risk everything to save her life. UWR9QMU. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bridge's weathered concrete as Derek's Toyota puttered along in the right lane, its engine making the same concerning noise it had been making for 3 weeks. Mia sat in the passenger seat, her small fingers tracing patterns on the fogged window as she chattered about her day. Mrs. Henderson said the Science Museum has a real dinosaur skeleton, Mia said, her voice bright with excitement. And they have this thing called a planetarium where you can see all the stars, even in the daytime. Derek's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. $15. Such a small amount for most families, but for them, it meant choosing between the field trip and groceries for the weekend. That sounds amazing, sweetheart. The stars during the day. Mark, can I go, Daddy? Please? Jessica's mom already signed her permission slip. Before Derek could answer, his attention snapped to the vehicle 3 car lengths ahead. The Tesla Model S, glossy black paint reflecting the afternoon light like a mirror, had begun weaving slightly between lanes. At first, Derek thought the driver might be texting or distracted, but the car's movements were becoming more erratic with each passing second. Bookmark, score UW9 Tech. Inside the luxury sedan, Aurora Sinclair gripped the leather steering wheel with white knuckles as her car's advanced computer systems began failing one by one. The dashboard displayed a cascade of warning messages in bright red text, while the vehicle's autopilot engaged and disengaged randomly, jerking the wheel from her control. Bookmark UWR. Aurora had been rushing to a board meeting downtown, her mind occupied with quarterly projections and merger negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The Tesla represented more than transportation. It was a statement, a symbol of the technological empire she'd built from nothing. Now, that same technology was betraying her at 70 feet above the Seabrook River. Manual override not responding. The car's artificial voice announced calmly, as if discussing the weather rather than a potential catastrophe. Aurora pressed harder on the brake pedal, but the regenerative braking system had gone haywire, applying pressure inconsistently and causing the car to lurch forward unpredictably. Derek watched the Tesla swerve toward the left lane, then back to the right, its movements becoming increasingly violent. The contrast between their vehicles couldn't have been starker. His 15-year-old Toyota with its duct-taped bumper and rattling exhaust system versus the cutting-edge electric vehicle that cost more than Derek would earn in 3 years. Daddy, what's wrong with that car? Mia asked, pressing her face against the window. I'm not sure, baby. The driver might be having trouble. UWR. The Tesla lurched again, this time hard enough that Derek could see the rear wheels lift slightly off the pavement. Aurora's panic was mounting as she realized the car was no longer responding to her commands at all. The bridge's narrow lanes left little room for error, and vehicles on both sides were beginning to slow down, creating a dangerous bottleneck. Aurora's world, boardrooms and private jets, penthouse offices and first-class everything, had never prepared her for mechanical failure. She was used to controlling every variable, managing every risk with precision and foresight. But there was no quarterly report for this moment, No strategic plan for when a $100,000 car became a guided missile on a crumbling bridge. The Tesla's tires squealed against the asphalt as the vehicle suddenly yanked hard to the right, toward the outer barrier of the bridge. Aurora fought the wheel desperately, her expensive Italian heels slipping on the pedals as she tried to regain control. Through the tinted windows, she caught glimpses of other drivers slowing down, their faces pressed against windows, but none of them stopping to help. Bookmark. Derek saw the moment when everything changed. The Tesla struck the concrete barrier with a sickening crunch of metal and plastic, the impact sending spiderweb cracks through the already weakened structure. For a heartbeat, the car teetered on the edge, its front wheels still on solid pavement, but its rear end hanging over the churning water 60 feet below. "Stay in the car," Derek commanded, his voice carrying an authority that made Mia's eyes go wide. He was already unbuckling his seatbelt, his mind operating on pure instinct. "Don't move until I get back." "Daddy, where are you?" But Derek was already out of the Toyota, running toward the disaster unfolding ahead of him. His work boots pounded against the bridge's surface as he closed the distance, his heart hammering against his ribs. Behind him, other drivers were pulling over, some reaching for phones to call 911, others simply staring in shock. Bookmark. UWR9. The Tesla groaned ominously as Derek reached it, the damaged barrier crumbling under the vehicle's weight. Through the driver's side window, he could see Aurora's face, pale, terrified, but somehow still composed. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant bun that had somehow survived the chaos, and her business suit probably cost more than Derek's monthly rent. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass. Aurora saw a man in work clothes, his face weathered by sun and worry, his hands already reaching for her door handle, despite the obvious danger. Derek saw a woman trapped in a machine that was supposed to protect her, but had instead become her prison. "Can you hear me?" Derek shouted over the noise of grinding metal and distant sirens. "I'm going to get you out." Bookmark. UWR9Q. The bridge shuddered as another section of barrier gave way. The Tesla tilted further, and Aurora felt her stomach drop as gravity began winning the battle. She could smell her own fear mixing with the expensive perfume she'd applied that morning. Chanel No. 5 that cost $150 a bottle, now competing with the metallic tang of rust and the river's earthy dampness rising from below. Bookmark. UWR. Derek didn't hesitate. He braced his shoulder against the Tesla's rear bumper, his muscles straining against 4,400 pounds of luxury engineering. The metal was warm from the afternoon sun and smooth under his calloused palms, so different from the rough surfaces he was used to handling at the depot and on his delivery routes. Bookmark. UWR9. Aurora watched through her mirrors as this stranger, this man who owed her nothing, who didn't even know her name, threw his entire body weight against her car. She could see his face contorted with effort, veins standing out on his neck as he fought against physics and gravity. His old work shirt was already soaked with sweat, and she realized with crystalline clarity that he was risking his life for hers. The irony wasn't lost on her. Aurora Sinclair, who could buy and sell companies with a phone call, who had more money in her checking account than most people would see in a lifetime, was being saved by someone who probably worried about paying for lunch. The inequality that had always existed as an abstract concept in board presentations was now literally holding her suspended above a deadly fall. Derek's boots scraped against the bridge surface as he tried to find better leverage. The Tesla's weight was enormous, but momentum was on his side. If he could just stop the backward slide, buy enough time for emergency responders to arrive with proper equipment. "Come on," he grunted through gritted teeth, every muscle in his back screaming in protest. This was different from loading trucks or carrying packages. This was life and death, measured in seconds and inches. More of the barrier crumbled away with a sound like breaking bones. The Tesla dropped another few inches, and Aurora felt the sickening sensation of weightlessness beginning to take hold. Through her windshield, She could see the water rushing far below, dark and unforgiving. Derek adjusted his grip, pressing his full weight against the car's frame. His wedding ring, a simple gold band he'd never been able to bring himself to remove, clinked against the Tesla's metal. The sound reminded him of Mia, waiting in their Toyota, probably frightened and confused about why Daddy had abandoned her to help a stranger. But that was the thing about Derek Baxter. He'd never been able to walk away when someone needed help, even when helping might cost him everything. It was the same instinct that made him work 18-hour days to keep Mia fed, the same drive that had him checking homework and packing lunches on 3 hours of sleep. Bookmark. With a final, tremendous effort, Derek managed to halt the Tesla's slide. The car teetered on the edge, balanced between salvation and catastrophe, held in place by nothing more than one man's determination to do the right thing. Behind them, fire trucks and ambulances were finally arriving, their sirens cutting through the afternoon air. But Derek couldn't let go, couldn't trust that the car would stay put long enough for proper rescue equipment to be deployed. Aurora twisted in her seat to look back at him. This guardian angel in work clothes who was literally holding her life in his hands. She wanted to thank him, to tell him who she was, to promise him rewards beyond his imagination. But all she could do was mouth the words, "Thank you," through the glass, hoping he could see the gratitude in her eyes. UWR. The moment stretched between them. Billionaire and working father, Tesla and Toyota. Different worlds connected by 30 seconds of crisis and one man's refusal to let a stranger fall. UWR. Derek had 30 seconds to make a choice that would change 2 lives forever. What would you do? Comment below. I read every single one. Within an hour, Derek's face was on every screen in Seabrook. Local hero saves billionaire tech CEO, the headlines screamed. But as reporters swarmed his apartment building and his phone rang nonstop, Derek felt like he'd made a terrible mistake. Heroes weren't supposed to worry about missing work to talk to cameras. Heroes weren't supposed to calculate the gas money they'd lost driving to interviews. The first news van arrived at Derek's apartment complex before he and Mia had even finished their drive home from the bridge. A blonde reporter in a crisp blazer stood outside the weathered building, her camera crew setting up equipment while she practiced her opening lines. More vehicles followed, local stations, regional networks, even a crew from Portland's major affiliate. Derek pulled into his usual parking spot and stared at the circus surrounding his front door. Mia pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide with confusion and excitement. "Daddy, why are all those people here? Is someone famous in our building?" Derek's phone buzzed again, the 15th call in the past 20 minutes. Unknown numbers, reporters wanting statements, producers offering exclusive interviews. He'd stopped answering after the 3rd call when a cheerful voice had asked him to describe the moment when you decided to become a hero today. "Stay close to me, okay?" Derek said, taking Mia's hand as they approached the building. "Don't talk to anyone with cameras." The reporter spotted them immediately, surging forward like a wave, microphones thrust toward Derek's face while camera lights blazed, temporarily blinding him. Questions came from every direction, overlapping into an incomprehensible wall of noise. "Derek, how does it feel to save a billionaire's life? What went through your mind when you saw the car falling? Did you know who Aurora Sinclair was when you rescued her?" Derek pushed through the crowd, shielding Mia with his body. One reporter blocked their path to the building entrance, her smile too bright, her questions too invasive. "Sir, our viewers would love to know, are you planning to ask Miss Sinclair for any kind of reward? A man in your financial situation must be considering." "Excuse me," Derek said firmly, stepping around her. The comment about his financial situation stung more than he wanted to admit. Even in his moment of supposed heroism, they couldn't help but point out his poverty. Bookmark 9 Self-4b. Inside their small apartment, the noise from outside was muffled but persistent. Derek double-locked the door and closed the blinds, trying to create some semblance of normalcy for Mia. But normal was impossible when helicopter news crews circled overhead and reporters knocked on their door every 10 minutes. "Daddy, you're on TV," Mia announced from the living room, where she'd turned on their old television. Sure enough, cell phone footage of the rescue played on repeat, showing Derek bracing against the Tesla while emergency crews arrived. The caption read, "Delivery driver risks life for stranger." Derek watched himself on screen and barely recognized the man. On television, he looked heroic, determined, fearless, larger than life. In reality, he felt small and overwhelmed, still wearing the same work clothes from his morning deliveries, still worried about the 3 hours of wages he'd lost dealing with police statements and witness interviews. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom Murphy. "Saw the news. Take tomorrow off paid. You've earned it." The gesture was kind, but Derek's stomach clenched anyway. One paid day off wouldn't solve anything. He'd already missed his evening shift at the depot, and the weekend was coming up with no extra work scheduled. Meanwhile, Mia's field trip permission slip sat on the kitchen counter, the $15 fee still impossible to manage. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" Derek asked, checking their refrigerator. Peanut butter, milk that would expire tomorrow, leftover pasta from 2 nights ago. He'd been planning to grocery shop after his depot shift, but that wasn't happening now. "Blah. Can we order pizza?" Mia asked hopefully. "Like the families on TV do when something good happens?" Derek's heart broke a little more. Even his 8-year-old daughter had absorbed the idea that good news meant celebrating with food they couldn't afford. "How about we make pancakes for dinner instead? We've got everything we need." 25 miles away, Aurora Sinclair stood in her penthouse office overlooking downtown Portland, watching the same news coverage on 3 different screens. The space around her was a monument to success: floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture that cost more than most people's cars, abstract art worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But Aurora felt more isolated than ever as she watched Derek Baxter's story unfold on television. The cameras had followed him to his apartment building, capturing the chipped paint and rusted railings, the children's toys scattered in the courtyard, the general air of people making do with less than they needed. One reporter had interviewed Derek's neighbor, an elderly woman who spoke glowingly about how Derek always helped carry her groceries and never asked for anything in return. Another had talked to Tom Murphy, who described Derek as the most reliable employee he'd ever had, someone who never complained and always showed up, no matter what. "He's got that little girl to take care of," Murphy had said on camera. "Been doing it alone since she was tiny. Works 2 jobs, never misses a day, never asks for help. If anyone deserves something good to happen to them, it's Derek Baxter." Bookmark. Aurora muted the television and stared out at the city lights below. In her world of board meetings and profit margins, she'd insulated herself from stories like Derek's. Poverty was a statistic in quarterly reports, not something that affected real people with real children who needed field trip money and worried about expired milk. She'd built her empire on the belief that success came from intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking. Merit-based achievement in a fair world where hard work always paid off. But watching Derek's story, Aurora realized how naive that worldview had been. Here was a man who worked harder than anyone she knew, who had saved her life without a second thought, who possessed more integrity than most of her fellow executives, and he was struggling to afford his daughter's school trip. Aurora opened her laptop and began researching. Derek Baxter, age 32, widowed father. Wife died in a car accident 4 years ago. Aurora's breath caught as she read the details. No life insurance, massive medical bills from the accident, bankruptcy filed and dismissed. 2 jobs, Excellent credit, despite financial hardship. No criminal record. Volunteer work at the community center, despite having no time to spare. The more Aurora learned, the more ashamed she felt of her own assumptions about wealth and worthiness. She'd been raised to believe that poverty was a choice, a result of poor decisions or lack of ambition. But Derek's story told a different truth. Sometimes life simply happened to good people, and no amount of hard work could overcome the mathematics of insufficient income. Bookmark, her assistant, knocked on the office door. "Miss Sinclair, the board is asking about your statement regarding today's incident. Public Relations wants to coordinate." "Cancel all my meetings tomorrow," Aurora said without turning around, "and get me Derek Baxter's address. The real one, not what the reporters have." "Ma'am?" Aurora finally turned from the window, her mind crystallizing around a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "I need to see him. Privately. No cameras, no publicity team, just me." For 35 years, Aurora had lived her life according to carefully calculated strategies, measuring every decision against potential return on investment. She'd never made an impulsive choice, never acted from pure emotion rather than logic. Bookmark, but watching Derek Baxter risk his life for a stranger, watching him deflect praise while worrying about lost wages, had awakened something in Aurora that all her success couldn't touch. For the first time in her adult life, she wanted to do something that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or profit margins. She wanted to do something that mattered. Aurora Sinclair was worth $2.3 billion, but Derek Baxter was about to teach her what true wealth really meant. Subscribe if you want to see how this story ends. When Aurora Sinclair stepped up to that podium 7 days later, Derek thought she was going to thank him and disappear back into her billionaire bubble. He'd worn his only good shirt and borrowed gas money to attend her press conference. What happened next didn't just shock everyone in that room. It shattered everything Derek thought he knew about hope. Bookmark R31DQJ. Derek had almost declined the invitation. The formal cardstock with embossed lettering felt foreign in his calloused hands, like something meant for people who belonged in boardrooms rather than loading docks. "Aurora Sinclair requests your presence at a community announcement," it read, with a downtown hotel address that Derek had only seen from the outside during his delivery routes. Bookmark 3ET. He'd spent 20 minutes standing in front of his closet that morning, staring at his limited options. The navy shirt Mia had given him for Father's Day 2 years ago, bought with coins she'd saved from lunch money, was his best choice, though it showed wear around the collar and cuffs. His one pair of dress pants still fit, barely, though they'd seen better days before Derek's weight had dropped from working 18-hour days and skipping meals. "You look handsome, Daddy," Maya had said, adjusting his tie with the seriousness of a fashion consultant. She'd insisted on coming along, wearing her favorite dress, a yellow sundress with tiny flowers that Derek's sister had sent for Christmas. "Are you nervous?" Derek was more than nervous. He was terrified. Public speaking ranked somewhere between tax audits and root canals on his list of preferred activities, and the thought of facing cameras again made his stomach churn. But Aurora Sinclair had personally called to invite him, her voice warm and genuine, nothing like the corporate executive he'd expected. The grand ballroom at the Portland Meridian Hotel was intimidating in its elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in white linen, while servers in black uniforms circulated with appetizers that Derek couldn't pronounce. City officials, business leaders, and journalists filled the space with the low hum of important conversations about important things. Derek felt like he was wearing a costume, playing dress-up in a world where he didn't belong. Mia held his hand tightly, her eyes wide as she took in the grandeur around them. They'd been seated at a table near the front, honor guests, the coordinator had explained, but Derek would have preferred hiding in the back row. "Ladies and gentlemen, A woman in an expensive suit announced from the podium, "Please welcome Aurora Sinclair, CEO and founder of Pinnacle Technologies." The applause was polite but measured as Aurora approached the microphone. Derek expected to see the same polished executive who'd built a tech empire, the woman whose quarterly earnings calls were dissected by financial analysts across the country. Instead, he saw someone transformed. Aurora wore a simple blue dress, elegant but understated, with minimal jewelry and softer makeup than her corporate headshots suggested. More striking was her demeanor. The rigid posture had relaxed, the practiced smile had given way to something more genuine. She looked like someone who had remembered how to be human rather than just successful. "Thank you all for coming," Aurora began, her voice carrying easily through the ballroom. "A week ago, I experienced something that changed my perspective fundamentally. I'm not here to talk about quarterly earnings or market expansion. I'm here to talk about courage, community, and what it means to truly make a difference." Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hoped this wouldn't turn into a detailed retelling of the bridge incident, complete with heroic embellishments that made him sound more noble than he'd felt in those terrifying moments. Bookmark. 7 days ago, a man I'd never met risked his life to save mine, Aurora continued. Derek Baxter didn't know who I was, didn't know my net worth, didn't calculate potential rewards or recognition. He saw someone in danger and acted. Because that's the kind of person he is. That's the kind of person our community is lucky to have. The spotlight found Derek's table, and he wanted to disappear into his chair. Cameras turned his direction while Aurora spoke, capturing his discomfort for audiences who would watch this later on the evening news. Neil hissed his hand and whispered, "That's my daddy," loud enough for nearby tables to hear and smile. But Derek's story didn't end with that rescue, Aurora said, her voice gaining strength. "As I learned more about the man who saved my life, I discovered something that should shame all of us. Here's someone who works 2 jobs, who has never missed a day despite personal hardships that would crush most people, who volunteers at the community center and helps his neighbors without being asked. And despite all that dedication, despite being exactly the kind of citizen we claim to value, Derek struggles to afford his daughter's school field trip." Bookmark. Derek's cheeks burned with embarrassment. Having his financial struggles broadcast to a room full of influential people felt like being stripped naked in public. He considered standing up and leaving, taking Mia home, where they could pretend none of this was happening. "That reality is unacceptable," Aurora declared, her voice carrying new authority. "It's unacceptable that heroism comes with the penalty of poverty, that doing the right thing means struggling to pay bills. It's unacceptable that children like Mia, brilliant, curious, deserving children, might miss opportunities because their parents are too busy surviving to thrive." The room had gone completely quiet. Even the servers had stopped moving, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Bookmark. Scorery FFGD. Aurora reached for a folder on the podium, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to announce. "Today, I'm establishing the Aurora Sinclair Foundation for Community Heroes. This foundation will identify and support individuals who embody the values we claim to cherish. People who help others, who work hard, who make their communities better simply by being in them." Bookmark. R3AGD. Mia's hand tightened in his. Around them, cameras clicked rapidly while reporters scribbled notes. This was bigger than a simple thank you speech, bigger than corporate public relations. This was something unprecedented. "The Foundation's first initiative," Aurora continued, looking directly at Derek, "will be the Guardian of Community Courage program. This program recognizes individuals who demonstrate extraordinary character in ordinary circumstances. People like Derek Baxter, who prove every day that heroism isn't about cape-wearing or glory-seeking. It's about showing up, helping out, and never giving up." Derek's heart was pounding so hard he was sure the microphones could pick it up. Guardian of Community Courage? He barely understood what Aurora was suggesting, but the formal title felt impossibly grand for someone who just delivered packages and loaded trucks. "Derek," Aurora said, her voice softer now, more personal despite the crowded room. "Would you please join me up here?" The walk to the podium felt like crossing an ocean. Derek's legs moved mechanically, while his mind reeled with confusion and growing dread. Whatever Aurora was planning, it felt too big, too much, too overwhelming for someone who just wanted to keep his head down and take care of his daughter. Aurora met him halfway, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Derek, I want everyone in this room to understand what you mean to this community. Not just because you saved my life, but because of how you live your life every single day. You represent the best of who we can be." She handed him an envelope, thick and official-looking, sealed with the foundation logo. "This foundation's first act is to ensure that you never again have to choose between doing the right thing and taking care of your family." Derek's hands shook as he opened the envelope. Inside were documents he couldn't immediately process. Legal papers, bank statements, housing agreements. The numbers on the pages seemed impossible, too large to be real. Bookmark R385. "Derek, the foundation is providing you with mortgage-free housing in the Riverside District," Aurora announced to the room. "Full educational funding for Mia through college, including all extracurricular activities she wants to pursue. And a community center grant in your name so you can continue the volunteer work that defines who you are." The ballroom erupted in applause, but Derek heard it as if from underwater. Mortgage-free housing, educational funding, these were concepts that belonged in other people's lives, not his. He stared at the papers in his hands, reading the same impossible numbers over and over. I can't." Derek's voice cracked, and he felt tears he couldn't control spilling down his cheeks. In front of cameras and community leaders and his 8-year-old daughter, he broke down completely. Bookmark R3H. Aurora moved closer, shielding him slightly from the crowd. "You saved my life, Derek. Now let me help save yours." Through his tears, Derek looked out at the audience and saw Mia standing on her chair, clapping with pure joy, even though she probably didn't understand the full implications. She knew her daddy was crying happy tears, and that was enough for her to celebrate. Aurora knelt down to address Mia directly, her voice carrying through the microphone so everyone could hear. "Mia, your daddy will never have to worry about money again. You can go on every field trip, join every team, pursue every dream. And you know why? Because your daddy is the kind of person who makes the world better just by being in it." Mia nodded solemnly, then whispered something in Aurora's ear that made the billionaire smile genuinely for the first time since Derek had met her. The little girl had whispered, "Thank you for seeing how special my daddy is. I always knew, but now everyone else knows too." Derek wiped his eyes and looked out at the room full of people. Some crying, some applauding, all witnessing a moment when the impossible became possible. For the first time in years, he wasn't calculating bills or worrying about tomorrow. He was simply overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers and the realization that sometimes, just sometimes, good things happen to people who needed them most. This is why I started Untold Triumphs, to share stories that prove good things still happen to good people. What's your definition of a modern miracle? Drop it in the comments. 6 months later, Derek stood in the Baxter Beacon Community Center, named after him, watching single parents share their stories in the same circle where he'd once felt so alone. The man who used to count quarters for gas money was now distributing scholarships. But the biggest transformation wasn't in Derek's bank account. It was in his daughter's eyes, which no longer held the quiet worry of a child who'd learned too young that dreams cost money. The community center occupied a converted warehouse in the heart of Seabrook's working-class district. Its brick walls now painted a warm yellow that caught the morning sunlight streaming through new windows. Inside, the space buzzed with activity that would have been impossible to fund 6 months earlier. Children attended after-school programs in rooms equipped with computers and art supplies, while their parents took classes in financial literacy, job training, and small business development. Derek moved through the center with easy confidence, greeting families by name, checking on programs, solving problems with the practical wisdom of someone who'd lived every struggle these people faced. The worn work clothes had been replaced with khakis and polo shirts, but his manner remained unchanged, approachable, genuine, untainted by his newfound security. "Mr. Derek," 7-year-old Marcus Johnson ran up to him, clutching a crayon drawing of what appeared to be a superhero. "Look what I made in art class." Derek knelt to examine the artwork seriously. Marcus's mother, Carmen, worked 2 jobs just as Derek once had, and the after-school program meant she could attend nursing classes without worrying about childcare. The Foundation's scholarship fund would cover her tuition, and Derek had personally helped her navigate the application process. "That's amazing, Marcus. Is this superhero helping people?" "Yeah, just like you helped that lady on the bridge. Mom says you help everybody now." Derek smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. 6 months ago, he'd been the one needing help, calculating whether he could afford groceries or his daughter's field trip. Now he was the person others turned to when life felt impossible, and the responsibility felt both humbling and energizing. Across the center, Aurora knelt in the community garden she'd insisted on planting herself, her business suits permanently replaced by jeans and work boots. Her manicured nails were now permanently stained with soil, and her conversations had shifted from quarterly projections to harvest seasons and composting techniques. "Derek, the tomatoes are coming in beautifully," she called, holding up a cluster of bright red fruit. "Mrs. Patterson says the food bank will be able to serve fresh vegetables twice a week now." The sight of Aurora Sinclair, former tech CEO worth billions, covered in dirt while discussing food distribution would have been unthinkable a year ago. But the woman who'd built her fortune on artificial intelligence algorithms had discovered that growing actual plants brought more satisfaction than any IPO or merger. Derek joined her in the garden, where elderly residents tended their own plots while sharing stories and advice. Mrs. Chen, who'd lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, was teaching Aurora the proper technique for pruning tomato plants, while critiquing her form with the authority of someone who'd fed a family of 6 from a backyard garden during harder times. "You're still too gentle with the pruning," Mrs. Chen scolded playfully. "These plants need firm hands, not corporate boardroom politeness." Aurora laughed, a sound that came easily now, no longer calculated for its impact on stock prices or media coverage. "I'm learning that gardens don't respond to PowerPoint presentations." The transformation in Aurora was as dramatic as Derek's rise from poverty. She'd stepped down from daily operations at Pinnacle Technologies, maintaining her role as board chair while dedicating her time to hands-on philanthropy. The Baxter Beacon Community Center was her first project, but not her last. Similar centers were opening in 5 cities across the Pacific Northwest, each one tailored to local needs and led by community members who understood struggle from personal experience. Through the center's windows, Derek could see the construction crews working on the new Crescent Bridge. After Aurora's foundation had lobbied city officials and provided matching funds for federal infrastructure grants, the condemned bridge was finally being replaced with a modern structure designed to last generations. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The same bridge where Derek had risked everything to save Aurora was now being rebuilt to protect countless others. Mia burst through the center's front doors, her school backpack bouncing as she ran toward Derek. At 9 years old, she moved with the confidence of a child who'd never known hunger or uncertainty, whose biggest worry was which extracurricular activities to choose, rather than whether her family could afford them. "Daddy, guess what? Mrs. Rodriguez says I can join the robotics team and the drama club. They don't meet on the same days, so I can do both." Derek caught her in a hug, marveling at the change in his daughter. The quiet, prematurely mature child who'd learned to expect disappointment had blossomed into an enthusiastic, curious girl who believed the world held unlimited possibilities. She no longer watched him calculate bills at the kitchen table or worry about every dollar spent. Instead, she focused on homework and friendships and dreams that stretched as far as her imagination could reach. That sounds perfect, sweetheart. Are you excited about both programs? The robotics team is building actual robots that can move around and pick things up, Mia explained, her eyes bright with excitement. And in drama club, we're going to perform a play for the whole school. Aurora said she wants to come watch. Aurora overheard and looked up from her tomato plants. I wouldn't miss it for anything. I've never seen a school play before. Never? Mia asked with the incredulity only a child could muster. I was always too busy with work when I was your age, and I never had children of my own, Aurora admitted. You're teaching me about a lot of things I missed. Derek watched the interaction between Aurora and Mia with deep gratitude. Their friendship had developed naturally, without the artificial dynamics of benefactor and recipient. Aurora treated Mia as an equal, asking her opinions on center programs and genuinely listening to her answers. In return, Mia had adopted Aurora as an honorary family member, complete with the brutal honesty children reserved for people they trusted completely. The afternoon brought Derek's favorite part of each day, the parent support group that met in the center's main room. 15 adults sat in a circle, sharing struggles and victories, with the openness that came from knowing everyone understood financial hardship personally. Derek facilitated the group, but his role was more peer counselor than authority figure. Sarah, how did the job interview go? Derek asked a young mother who'd been unemployed for 8 months after her factory job was eliminated. Sarah Martinez smiled, the first genuine smile Derek had seen from her in weeks. I got it, full-time position at the medical office with health insurance for me and the kids. The foundation's professional clothing program made all the difference. I actually felt confident walking in there. The group erupted in applause, and Derek felt the familiar warmth that came from watching people reclaim their lives. Sarah's situation had been particularly challenging. 3 children under 10, an ex-husband who contributed nothing, and a job market that seemed designed to exclude single parents. The Foundation's wraparound services had addressed each obstacle systematically: professional wardrobe assistance, childcare during interviews, transportation support, and skill development classes. What about you, James? How's the truck driving school going? James Washington, a former construction worker whose back injury had ended his career, grinned and gave a thumbs up. Passed my CDL test yesterday. Aurora's transportation scholarship covered everything: tuition, testing fees, even the physical exam. I start with Martinez Logistics next week. These success stories multiplied weekly. The Foundation's approach was comprehensive rather than charitable, identifying systemic barriers and removing them through coordinated support rather than simple handouts. Job training led to career placement, which led to stable housing, which led to educational opportunities for children, which led to families breaking cycles of poverty that had persisted for generations. Derek's own transformation was perhaps the most dramatic example. From delivery driver and depot worker to community center director and foundation partner, his journey proved that given opportunity and support, people could exceed everyone's expectations, including their own. His salary now allowed him to save for Mia's future while also contributing to causes he cared about, the same community programs that would have helped him years earlier. But the changes went beyond individual success stories. The entire Riverside neighborhood was experiencing renewal. Small businesses were opening, as residents gained disposable income. Property values were rising as families felt secure enough to invest in home improvements, and crime rates had dropped as young people found alternatives to street life through the center's programs. The new bridge, scheduled to open in 2 months, represented the culmination of community transformation. Where the old structure had been crumbling and dangerous, the new Crescent Bridge would feature pedestrian walkways, bicycle lanes, and architectural elements that celebrated Seabrook's history while pointing toward its future. A bronze plaque near the entrance would commemorate Derek's heroic act and Aurora's responsive generosity. But both had insisted the focus remain on community resilience rather than individual recognition. Aurora joined Derek as he locked up the center at the end of the day, both of them tired but satisfied with the progress they'd witnessed. Their friendship had become one of the most meaningful relationships in both their lives, built on shared values rather than shared circumstances, sustained by mutual respect rather than obligation. "Derek, I have something to tell you," Aurora said as they walked toward the parking lot where Derek's new Honda Civic sat next to Aurora's modest Subaru. The Tesla had been replaced after the bridge incident, but Aurora had chosen reliability over status, practicality over prestige. The Foundation Board wants to expand the Guardian of Community Courage program nationally. 25 cities in the first phase, with community centers modeled on what we've built here. But we need someone to lead the expansion, someone who understands the challenges these communities face from lived experience. Derek stopped walking. "Are you asking me to?" "I'm asking you to consider becoming the Foundation's National Director of Community Programs. Same hands-on approach, but helping replicate these results across the country. You'd travel some, but Mia would come with you during school breaks. She's already excited about seeing new places." Derek looked back at the community center that bore his name, at the neighborhood where families were building better lives, at the construction site where a stronger bridge was rising from the foundation of the old. 6 months ago, his world had consisted of survival and sacrifice, limited to the radius he could cover during his delivery routes. Now Aurora was offering him a chance to help transform communities nationwide, to ensure that other struggling parents wouldn't have to choose between doing right and paying rent. The boy who'd grown up in poverty, the man who'd counted quarters for gas money, was being invited to shape national policy on community development. "I'll need to think about it," Derek said, though his heart had already decided. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Just remember, you've already proven you can change lives. Now we're asking if you want to change the world." 3 years later, as Derek tucked Mia into her own bedroom in their own house, she asked him the question that stopped his heart. "Daddy, what would have happened if you hadn't saved that lady?" Derek looked around at their comfortable home, thought about the hundreds of families the Foundation had helped, and realized the answer wasn't about saving Aurora Sinclair at all. It was about what happens when one moment of courage creates a lifetime of hope. The house in Riverside Meadows felt like a dream Derek was still adjusting to, even after 18 months of mortgage-free living. Mia's bedroom walls were painted lavender, her choice, and lined with bookshelves holding more books than Derek had owned in his entire childhood. Her desk held homework assignments for advanced math and science classes, applications for summer enrichment programs, and art projects that showed the creativity of a child whose imagination had never been constrained by financial limitations. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Derek asked, sitting on the edge of her bed next to the stuffed elephant that had survived their apartment days and now rested against pillows that didn't come from garage sales. "I mean, what if you hadn't stopped that day on the bridge? What if Aurora's car had just fallen and we never met her?" Mia's 11-year-old mind was grappling with concepts of fate and consequence that would challenge philosophers. Derek considered the question seriously, the way he'd learned to respect Mia's thoughtful observations about the world around her. If he hadn't acted that day, Aurora would have died. But beyond that immediate tragedy, the ripple effects of inaction would have been staggering. Hundreds of families would still be trapped in cycles of poverty, community centers would remain underfunded dreams, and infrastructure projects would continue to languish while politicians debated budgets. "Well," Derek said slowly, "Aurora wouldn't be here to annoy you about eating your vegetables at dinner tomorrow night." Mia giggled. Aurora had become a fixture in their lives, joining them for dinner every Sunday and most weeknights when her foundation work kept her in Seabrook. The billionaire who'd once lived exclusively on catered meals and restaurant food now took pride in her improving cooking skills, though her attempts at healthy eating often met resistance from Mia's 11-year-old palate. "But seriously, kiddo, I think a lot of people would still be struggling in ways they don't have to struggle anymore. Remember Marcus from the community center? His mom just graduated nursing school because Aurora's scholarship program gave her that chance. Without that day on the bridge, Marcus might still be doing homework in his mom's car between her two jobs. The conversation was interrupted by Derek's phone buzzing with a text from Aurora. Tomorrow's Bridge Day planning meeting moved to 7 p.m. Carmen wants to add another scholarship recipient speech. We're up to 12 testimonials now. Bridge Day had become an annual celebration marking the anniversary of Derek's rescue and Aurora's announcement. What started as a simple community gathering had grown into a regional event, drawing families from across the Pacific Northwest to celebrate resilience and community support. This year's event would coincide with the opening of 3 new community centers, bringing the foundation's total to 28 locations across 8 states. Derek kissed Mia goodnight and headed to his home office, where files and reports documented the exponential growth of programs that had started with one man's split-second decision to help a stranger. The numbers were staggering. 847 families moved from poverty to stability, 312 adults completing job training programs, 89 small businesses launched with foundation microloans, and 156 children receiving full educational scholarships from kindergarten through college. But Derek had learned that numbers told only part of the story. The real impact lived in individual transformations like Carmen Martinez, who'd gone from unemployed single mother to registered nurse and was now training to become a nurse practitioner. Or James Washington, whose trucking career had evolved into owning his own logistics company and employing 12 other drivers. Or Sarah Chen, whose food truck business started with a foundation microloan, now employed 6 people and had expanded to 3 locations. These success stories had attracted national attention, inspiring other wealthy individuals to adopt Aurora's hands-on philanthropy model. Tech entrepreneur Michael Torres had launched similar programs in California, while oil heiress Jennifer Blake was funding community centers throughout Texas. The Aurora effect, as media outlets called it, was reshaping how Americans thought about wealth responsibility and community investment. Derek's role had evolved beyond his wildest imagination. As National Director of Community Programs, he now traveled regularly, helping establish new centers and train local leaders. Mia often accompanied him during school breaks, soaking up geography lessons and cultural experiences that would have been impossible in their old life. She'd attended theater performances in San Francisco, visited museums in Denver, and made friends across the country, all while watching her father transform struggling communities through programs she helped design. The Foundation's approach remained rooted in Derek's original insight, that poverty wasn't a character flaw, but a circumstance, and that given opportunity and support, people could exceed everyone's expectations. This philosophy had influenced policy at state and federal levels, with Derek testifying before Congress about community-based poverty solutions and Aurora funding research that challenged traditional welfare approaches. Saturday morning brought Derek to the original Baxter Beacon Community Center, where he led the weekly support group that had been the Foundation's first program. The circle had grown from 15 members to 30, with graduates often returning as mentors for newer participants. The conversation that morning focused on Maria Santos, whose house cleaning business had grown successful enough to hire 4 employees, allowing her to provide health insurance and paid vacation for workers who'd previously lived paycheck to paycheck. When I started this business 2 years ago with the Foundation's microloan, I was just trying to survive, Maria told the group. Now I'm creating jobs for other women who need flexibility to care for their families. It's not about the money, it's about dignity, about showing your kids that hard work and community support can build something lasting. Derek listened to Maria's story with the same amazement he felt every week, watching people transform their lives and then reach back to help others climb up behind them. The cycle of positive change was self-perpetuating now, creating momentum that would continue long after Derek and Aurora were gone. After the meeting, Derek found Aurora in the community garden, teaching a group of children how to plant winter vegetables. Her transformation remained the most dramatic Derek had witnessed. The driven CEO who lived for quarterly projections now measured success in tomato harvests and literacy rates, finding more satisfaction in one child's reading progress than she'd ever derived from stock price increases. "Derek, I've been thinking about Mia's question from last night," Aurora said, brushing soil from her hands. "About what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day." "And what did you conclude?" Aurora looked around the garden, where children played between raised beds while their parents attended classes inside the center. "I think someone else would have stopped. Maybe not that day, maybe not for me specifically, but somewhere, somehow, another Derek Baxter would have stepped up when it mattered. Good people don't wait for permission to do the right thing." Derek smiled at her optimism, though he wasn't sure he shared it. The world was full of opportunities to help that went unnoticed or ignored. Moments when intervention could change everything, but didn't happen because people were too busy, too scared, or too convinced that someone else would handle it. "But here's what I know for certain," Aurora continued. "Your 30 seconds of courage didn't just save my life. It saved your family's future, Marcus's mother's career, Maria's business dreams, and hundreds of other possibilities we'll never fully know about. It created a different timeline where hope wins more often than despair." That evening, Derek stood on the new Crescent Bridge with Aurora and Mia, watching the sunset paint the Seabrook River in shades of gold and orange. The modern structure was a testament to what communities could accomplish when resources met determination, when individual actions created collective change. Mia leaned against the railing where a bronze plaque commemorated the original rescue, but the inscription focused on community resilience rather than individual heroism. "Do you think you'll ever stop being surprised by how much everything changed?" she asked. Derek considered the question while watching families cross the bridge safely, children riding bicycles in dedicated lanes that hadn't existed on the old structure. "I think the surprise isn't that everything changed, sweetheart. The surprise is how much good was possible all along, just waiting for someone to believe it could happen." As they walked home to their comfortable house in their safe neighborhood, Derek realized that Mia's earlier question had the wrong premise. It wasn't about what would have happened if he hadn't saved Aurora. It was about what became possible because he did, because one ordinary person chose courage over comfort in a moment when courage mattered most. Behind them, the bridge lights illuminated the path for evening travelers, ensuring safe passage for thousands of people who would never know that their security existed because a struggling father had once risked everything to help a stranger. That was the true legacy. Not the recognition or rewards, but the quiet confidence that someone would always be there when courage was needed most. Derek Baxter's 30 seconds of courage created decades of change. Aurora Sinclair's shocking decision proves that wealth means nothing if it doesn't lift others up. This is exactly why I created Untold Triumphs, to remind us that heroes walk among us every day, and one person really can change the world. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, because every week I'm bringing you more stories that prove good people still exist and miracles still happen when we choose courage over comfort. Like this video if you believe that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, and that 30 seconds of bravery can transform generations. And comment below. Tell me about a time when someone's courage changed your life, or when your courage changed someone else's. These stories matter, and I read every single comment because your experiences remind us all that heroism isn't about cape-wearing or glory-seeking. It's about showing up, helping out, and never giving up on each other. Until next time, keep believing in the power of one person to change everything. Because as Derek and Aurora proved, sometimes saving someone else is really about saving us all.